The Ashanti sold the Europeans prisoners of war and their own criminals. A large part of their wealth and glory was based on slavery. I wanted to know if they had any regrets. So I asked the king's son, Ohiniba Adewese Poku.
The whole slavery episode was an unfortunate era in the history of Africa, and for that matter, of Ashanti. One would say it depleted the human resources of the empire. What perhaps the empire could have achieved, was lost through this trade. So much as we, as I said, do regret, that era in our history, perhaps it was a sign of the times, and we couldn't have done otherwise.
But do you think the Africans understood how horrible the transatlantic slave trade was?
No. I mean, I don't think they knew. I mean, if they had known, known about the horrible stories that these our brothers and sisters were going through when they were being transported, not only from our coast, but through the transatlantic, through Goree, and then the transatlantic route to the States. I don't think they would have continued doing it. I mean, besides, there was no means of knowing, the, brutalities that they underwent.
Perhaps the people around the castles might have seen how horrible it was.
They might have seen some aspect of it, but those of us, that's our ancestors who were in the interior, had no means of knowing, except through a few stories here and there. But if they had known, I'm sure that they wouldn't have continued doing it.
It's hard to turn down such a huge source of profit. The motivation of human beings.
Well, that's the human factor in trading, the profitability of it. But it happened, and I think most people are very sorry that it did happen that way. Yes.
Especially the slaves.
Well, I hope so. Yes. Yes.
It's not surprising that he should want to explain away this nightmare in our history. The truth is, like everyone else in this business, the Ashanti were motivated by profit. At last I made it into Benin, the modern name of Dahomey. Stories about human sacrifice and barbarism here were favorite travelers' tales in the 18th century. Traders were far more fearful of Dahomey's kings than they were of Ashantis. The kingdom expanded rapidly in the 1700s, conquering all who stood in its way. Many people took refuge in isolated places. At the end of the last century, the royal court covered 100 acres, and 10,000 people lived inside its walls. Today, the palaces are being restored by Joseph Adande.
The kings of Dahomey traded a lot of slaves. The kings of Dahomey traded a lot of slaves. The kings of Dahomey traded a lot of slaves. Abomey has traded, from the figures we know now, not far from 1 million people. Not far from 1 million people. Not far from 1 million people. Just from Abomey alone. And you have more from the neighboring kingdoms, Savi Kingdom, for instance, Port Novo Kingdom, etc., etc.
All the way down to Lagos in Nigeria.
Yes, all the way to Lagos in Nigeria. And the cannons you can see here are the sign of the slave trade, because they would buy a cannon against 25 gentlemen.
Do the citizens of Benin today, through the schools or publicly, talk about this history of the slave trade when the people of Dahomey sold other black people to the white man and then shipped them to the New World?
We do not talk much about slave trade, slavery, because for most of Beninese people, 300 years back is a lot. Those who have been to school know about slave trade, know about what happened to their brothers sold to the New World. And a few months back, we had the bicentenary of the death of King Agonglo. And Agonglo was said to be one of the kings who tried to stop slave trade.
Ah,
But of course, he did not succeed.
but he must have known how bad it was.
Yes, he knew. They knew how bad it was. That was why they didn't trade their own people. They would trade people from the wars and battles they did all around the country.
Well, there's no attempt to explain away anything here. This recently restored artwork on the palace walls tells the whole story.
The kings of Dahomey carried a lot of war. There was almost every year a war. This image again shows you that we are dealing with Yoruba people because you can see the scars on their faces. And this gentleman has been beheaded again because, well, he lost.
But there's so many images on these panels
Yes.
of violence, of conquering.
Yes.
Was it a particularly violent kingdom?
Well, people say and pretend that it is a particularly violent kingdom, but I have not seen throughout history any conqueror not being violent. Have you ever come across someone who is conquering and is not violent?
No, generally people conquer by violence.
Okay, so that's this kingdom. They did, of course, cultivate the art of superiority, and each king had to train his son to be a warrior, to be someone who is greedy of power, of expanding all over.
What's this low building over here?
This is the building King Lele erected in memory of his ancestors, both male and female.
In memory of his ancestors?
Yes. And you see, you have to bend down before entering this place because you have to show respect. Instead of kneeling, you have to bend down deeply. It's like a tomb, but nobody has been buried here. Those walls are made of mud, of course, some gold powder, rum, probably some palm oil, then some blood.
And blood?
Yes.
What, animal blood?
Well, there's certainly some animal blood, and probably there was, it is said that there is some human blood into the walls.
Human blood?
Yes.
Were people sacrificed?
Yes, people were sacrificed, but it's not any slave who is sacrificed. A king from another place is always sacrificed. The head of the army is always sacrificed.
Rivals.
Rivals, yes. Mighty rivals are always sacrificed.